Good morning, everyone. The council is convened for a couple of work sessions this morning, February 26, 2025. We'll get started with the IBR program. And Frank and Paige, please join us. Thank you for being here. Michelle can run the slides for you, and you can just take it away.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair and members of the council. I'm Frank Green, Assistant Program Administrator on the IBR program.
I am Paige Schloop, the other Assistant Program Administrator, focused on transit.
Yeah, and we have a few slides to walk through, I think, based on some of the questions, a little bit of the questions that we got when I came up and sat with Scott when he was presenting. I want to say it was just a couple of weeks ago, but it might have been a month or so ago. Recognizing you may have additional questions as we go through this. So if we can go to the next slide. Just wanted to kind of remind everyone of where this program began, that, it's really been, more than 25 years or almost 3 decades of planning that's gone on in this region to identify what's needed with the I-5 corridor. Originally it started in the late 90s with the trade and transportation partnership work and the I-5 freight study, moved into the Columbia River crossing in the kind of the early 2000s. And, this program really did pick up in 2019 when the two governors, charged the two DOTs with starting and the program to study this. So we're really developing, this program with a lot of previous planning, trying to understand what's needed in this corridor. The modified LPA that we'll define here a little bit more detailed was kind of the culmination of a lot of these planning efforts and a lot of coordination with, some of the kind of the direct partners that would have either a funding and or construction potential role in defining what the program is. You see the partner agencies that are listed on this slide. There's really the two MPOs, so RTC on the Washington side, Metro on the Oregon side, the two transit agencies, CTRAN as well as TriMet, 2 cities and the 2 ports are also included here because of their direct kind of connection within this proximity of the bridge. And so that modified locally preferred alternative, once again, built on what had been previously studied and had a record of decision through environmental studies in the previous program known as CRC.
Chair?
Next slide. Oh,
Yes,
Can I ask
go
questions?
ahead.
yeah.
I'm just curious because I'm new. How did the county get left off of this list?
Well, and one of the clear things that if you go back in history with the CRC project, there was a much bigger task force that helped really hone down the alternatives that were being studied. The counties, both counties, Multnomah County and Clark County, were a part of that task force that identified the alternative ultimately that was the locally preferred alternative, which was replacement of the bridge, with certain interchange investments as well as light rail. That's during CRC. So this program picked up, and we were really kind of focused on those, what we had kind of, I think the region had called the project sponsors, that were the ones who are going to be responsible to fund and actually deliver within their jurisdictions. So I think that's kind of how, over the years, building on that past work, the different parties and the agencies you see here, as I said, the agencies that are shown here have a kind of direct within their jurisdiction and within their, responsibility for the roadways or for the infrastructure involvement. And that's why this is the kind of the group that's the executive steering group right now.
And I just add to that the county's involvement, as some of the small cities too, is through our participation on the boards of CTRAN and the Regional Transportation Council. So we have seats at the table with other people.
Thank you. Yeah, I should have mentioned that.
I do have a comment, actually.
Let's go ahead.
Just to kind of circle back to Councilor Little's comment. So there's a joint policy advisory committee on transportation with the Metro Group, and I have asked several different times with the Regional Transportation Committee that Clark County be involved and included in that, as all Oregon counties, Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington, The city of Vancouver is a part of that, but Clark County does not have a seat at that table. And I think it's very important that we do. So just to answer your question, thank you.
Which table was that, Councilor Belcott?
It's the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation. I have talked to the Regional Transportation Committee, Matt Ransom, several times about getting the seat at the table. And I've also talked to CTRAN about that as well recently.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So if you can move to the next slide. So just I know this is a busy slide, but this kind of represents all of the elements, both on the multimodal solution that is the modified locally preferred alternative. So there's investments really in all modes within this modified LPA. So it's a kind of a 5-mile stretch of I-5 that includes investments at 7 interchanges. It also includes active transportation investments, really for the entire length of some of that improvement. So from like Marine Drive to Hayden Island, as well as across the river. And then it does include multiple kind of aspects of transit investments, which are the almost 2-mile extension of Max Light Rail into downtown Vancouver with 3 new stations, as well as allowing for use of the shoulder with the new investments on the freeway for express bus. And Paige will go a little bit more into kind of the definition of some of the transit options. So this does include a replacement of the existing bridge. We are looking to replace it downstream of the existing bridge so that we can maintain I-5 traffic throughout construction. That's one of the most important parts that we'll be looking for when we're looking to get a contractor on board is maintaining the 3 through lanes. Now, they're obviously, with all the shifts and everything that are going to have to happen in construction, there will ultimately be some potential nighttime or weekend closures as some of that work has to happen. But during the daytime peak hours, we'll be doing everything we can to maintain the 3 through lanes in both directions for the freeway. So a lot of work to really identify each of these investments that were going to be made. Working with those partners I mentioned on the previous slide, we did get to kind of a consensus of that group. They all agreed to move forward this modified LPA. So all the agencies on that previous slide, there were some conditions, and I think that's one of the reasons we're here today is to talk about one of CTRAN's conditions, which had originally explicitly said they didn't want to participate in the funding of light rail, but in their November meeting last year, that language was kind of revised. And so I think that's one of the key things I think that's prompted some of these discussions, recognizing that. So next slide.
And just to clarify in my introduction, my name is Paige Schloop. And when we join IBR, we become IBR. We'll focus on that. Just like Frank has his background with WashDOT, I'm actually a TriMet employee. So I know the council asked for them to be represented here. I've worked for TriMet for 17 years, but I'm here as part of the program, and we all have a unified cause for that. So the graphic you see here is kind of a more diagrammatic version of what Frank just explained. So on the right side of the page, that dark blue line shows the 5 miles of transportation improvements. The teal line on the right near the river is those bike and ped improvements. And what I'm here to describe is the orange portion of it, the dotted line, the transit part. And so there's the light rail element and there's the express bus portion of it. So there's 1.9 miles extension of the Max Yellow Line. That includes 3 new stations, one at Evergreen near downtown Vancouver, one at the Vancouver waterfront, and one at Hayden Island, which is an important connection. There's a lot of potential there. And we likely will end up rebuilding the expo station. The new bridge is taller, so everything has to go up. And that's part of why we've got this 5 miles. We've got to catch those grades to get to that peak on the bridge and have those clearances over the water. And so there's also the potential for 2 park and rides in downtown Vancouver. We're still working with the city on those details of that. There are also light rail vehicles as a portion of that, and overnight facilities and maintenance facilities related to the light rail portion of it. And the express bus is bus on shoulder, and that's Vancouver's or C-Trans portion of it. And so you have the light rail is carrying the bulk of the ridership. A train can hold about 280 people, and it's going more frequent. And then we have this complementary service where we have the C-Tran express bus that's meant for people going from downtown Vancouver to downtown Portland. And it's a very kind of specialized service, and it provides an important connection for people, but it goes a lot less frequently. And an express bus can carry about 80 people. So that's why we've got this train going back and forth. And this will come into play when we have O&Ms carrying more people, and the express bus going a lot less frequently on a smaller vehicle. Next slide.
Chair.
Yeah.
Paige, a question for you. The express bus, because what I'm not seeing here is the improvement or widening of the 5 freeway to downtown Portland. So the express bus, as it happens now, will potentially get stuck in traffic. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where
yes.
the
It's an important part.
Trimont, the Max won't.
Yes.
Right, because it's on it. Okay.
Yes, I'm getting there too, but yes,
Thank you.
it's a really important factor with that. But the next slide. So why do we have both of these different complementary services? Well, we have a combination of bus and rail because you've got that train that ties into the existing system and connects you to the whole network of light rail, 80 miles of it, where the express bus is really focused on that sort of commuter type peak morning, peak evening service for those people that want that one seat ride. But the light rail has a lot more capacity and versatility. So if you're someone coming from Portland, going up to Vancouver to enjoy an afternoon on the waterfront and lunch, you have that option to go from North Portland or even Hillsborough if you wanted to take a long journey. But it connects those two systems. There are a lot of economic benefits. So we talked about that. Vancouver is growing rapidly. I think you all know that much more than I in the region. And so this is a great connection deep into the future, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And these are all the reasons why we ended up where we are. And so approximately 43% of the people crossing both the I-5 and I-205 bridges are commuters across the river, going back and forth. Next slide. And back to Frank.
Yeah. Excuse me. So, as we were a few years ago, kind of building on that past work and coming back with the understanding that, what's really changed in 10 years. That was one of the most important questions we had to ask from the time CRC had gotten their record of decision to when we were kind of picking this work up and saying what's changed and what we're referring to as the modified locally preferred alternative be, because the previous program, as I mentioned, had identified that locally preferred alternative. We had a lot of public outreach, a lot of community engagement. As you can see here, we did an online survey and got almost 10,000 responses. We had listening sessions. We had several monthly meetings where we were allowing for community advisory group and our equity advisory groups, as well as working groups, to provide feedback. We even did kind of a statistical poll to look at what are people looking at or thinking as far as how the modified LPA was starting to form. And as you can see, there was, support for a transit element on the program, and specifically a light rail element. You can see some of the percentages that are on the slide here. Clark County was 61%. If you took out kind of the Vancouver area, it's about 57%. So there was some support. And I think that really kind of resonated with, I think, the executive steering group. That we were hearing some of the demographics, I think, in Clark County somewhat have been changing since, I think, the previous program. There was a lot of people who were expressing that interest in being able to see a choice, to have a choice. As Paige had mentioned, the express bus may go from city center to city center, but if you're going to go to PIR or Expo for an event, or or, you know, even somewhere down like the Rose Quarter, you know, having a choice of using light rail maybe instead of driving a car was some of the input we received back in 2022 that we shared with our executive steering group. And that's the group of partners that includes, you know, all of the Washington partners. So RTC, CTRAN, Port of Vancouver, City of Vancouver, and WashDOT, as well as their counterparts on the Oregon side to endorse that modified LPA. Next slide.
Chair.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. Were the listening sessions equally distributed on either side of the river?
I believe so. I think there was, I believe there was same amount on both sides. And this was kind of right in the height of the pandemic. So a lot of it was online and virtual. But we were definitely trying to target similar amount of audiences from both sides of the river. Yes. Next slide.
All right. So why is Express Bus needed? We talk about how that is complementary. It gives that direct route and helps create that stronger system, and it engages CTRAN in the process too. So each one has their purpose, but different purposes there. Next slide. I think I got ahead of myself and covered that slide in my previous conversation. So what is the estimated capital cost for transit? The transit capital cost is about $1.3 to $1.9 billion. That includes guideways, which is the track and the rail, stations, vehicles. We talked about the buses and LRVs, which is short for light rail vehicles. And the support facilities for the bus facilities, as well as the light rail facilities where the maintenance happens. Systems such as traction power, substations, and all of the contract wide, we include risk and contingency, and there's professional services for the design and the construction portion of it. Next slide. So the new vehicles. So why do we need more vehicles? Because we're covering more area and we have more frequent service coming. And so a lot of that is calculated on this project. We talked about Ruby Junction being where one of the places, Clear Out and Gresham, that the main maintenance will happen. And Expo being an overnight facility, which is going to be focused mostly on cleaning in the day-to-day service, but the real bulk of the actual repairs, the heavy equipment, all that stuff is out at Ruby Junction. So that's a long journey for the trains to travel through our system, go downtown, and all the way out to Gateway. And so you add that mileage on top of the 2 miles we're doing for rail, and those vehicles have to travel a lot to get here. And so that's part of the calculation there. Also increasing the frequency and many other factors come into play with how we determine it. And these are numbers we're going to continue to refine as we observe ridership as the project progresses. And we'll be tweaking them, working with our project partners on all of those factors. And so that's why it requires 19 new vehicles for that increased frequency. And CTRAN is also getting more express buses. I think they're currently planned to be EV and high capacity vehicles, which is a double decker. So those are about 80 passengers per vehicle. If it were one, a single bus is usually about 40 passengers per vehicle. Next slide.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I was curious, how many cars, or what do you call them? When there are vehicles on here,
Vehicles,
but what
yeah.
are they called? Vehicles?
Yeah,
So how many vehicles are currently dedicated to the yellow line?
it is 12
12?
vehicles currently on the
And so
yellow.
we're saying we need 19 more for 3 additional stations?
Yeah, and that's due to that. The yellow line starts at Rose Quarter to here, and it doesn't have to travel the entire distance. Once you add the entire distance of the yellow line, that adds a lot more time and travel time into the system.
So how many miles is it from beginning to end right now, the yellow line?
That is a good question. I do not know that off the top of my head, but we can get that info to you.
Okay. I know nothing about this, so I could be completely wrong, but at first glimpse, it seems out of skew. I would be interested in getting more information and data onto the, what you built into what's needed to serve the new portion of the line. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, we can. talk about returning with more
Yeah.
detail.
Thank you.
Well, and I think the second bullet, Councilor Young, under the extending light rail, I think is one of the important things to be thinking about is that right now the current terminus for the yellow line is Expo, which apart from special events, there's it's not the destination that I would say Vancouver City Center would ultimately be, and so as you think about trying to get 6 or 7 minute, what we call headways, or a light rail vehicle coming every 6 to 7 minutes. It's not just a factor of how much longer the line is, it's where that vehicle's going. And so, in trying to ensure that with the 2 mile extension that you're having those vehicles come every 6 to 7 minutes with, the increased potential ridership. So if you fill up in Vancouver, then people can't get on at Expo, can't get on it, further down the line. And so, you're trying to do this balancing of how many riders are going to use it in Vancouver, and how do you ensure that there's still some seats or some availability for the rest of the line. And so it does need an increase in vehicles with those a little bit of increase in the frequencies. Today, I think you're not at 7 minutes, right? We're at 10 minutes. So we would
Somewhere
be,
in there,
yeah, so we would be increasing the frequency as well of how often those light rail vehicles are operating in order to serve kind of the newer destination of downtown Vancouver. So there's a number of factors that go into it. We can do a little bit more to get a little bit more justification on it, but that's so it's increase in how frequent, but also understanding that riders here are going to still want to make sure people can get on down the system as well.
Thank you.
So-
Definitely would look forward to more information on that.
Yeah.
Chair,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yes.
Councilor Young, 5.8 miles between Expo and 5.8 miles between Expo and downtown Portland. But my question to you is, what's the lifespan of a light rail vehicle?
That is a good question, Councillor Fuentes. So it is actually a light rail vehicle lasts about 1 million miles, where a bus lasts about 100,000 miles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You may not know the answer to this, but I'm curious that we haven't gotten that far yet, but are we anticipating that the EV buses are going to get longer range than 100,000?
I'm not sure about that one. I think EV is fairly new, and so I'm not sure what the track record is for that, but
It's
that would
probably
be good
too
to
soon to
know.
really know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I know that other jurisdictions use them, so we could certainly find the information.
I know C-Tran has multiples, but I don't know if they've racked up 100,000 miles yet.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
So, kind of wrapping up the first part of the discussion here was kind of really diving into the capital costs, and then we'll get into the O&M. I think as we may have mentioned in a previous presentation, but I think the makeup of the board is a little different. Where are we getting the funds for the program? Right now the entire modified LPA that we had shown is estimated between 5 and 7.5 billion. The program has been looking from a risk perspective of trying to really get about 6 billion secured. To date, we have $1 billion from each state legislature. We do have authorization for tolls from both states up to about $1.25 billion. And then we have 2 big federal grants that we've actually been awarded. And since last time I think I came and presented to the board, we've actually executed those agreements with our federal partners. So that's the 2 grants that you see on the slide here. There's $600 million. That's a mega grant. Those are kind of flexible funds from that program, which could make those allowable to be spent on the transit kind of portion of our program. And then there's the Bridge Investment Program grant that we got 1.5 billion. So with the 2.1 billion there, really the kind of the outstanding remaining piece to get the funding for the capital side, so for the construction side, is what we're calling an FTA capital investment grant. That is a much more stepped process than these other grants that we've applied for. So the 2 grants we've been awarded, they put out a notice of an opportunity to get it. You submit an application, they review your application, and then they'll award based on merit, for programs around the country. The capital investment grant is a stepped process. FTA wants to be able to work with the potential grantees throughout development, much further, I think, into the details of development before a grant agreement would be awarded. So we were actually, as a program, we were accepted into the first phase. It's called project development. That's a phase that takes about 2 years, and then you enter into engineering before you can get the full funding grant agreement. So we anticipate, kind of working with FTA to enter into engineering, early next year likely, so that we can get into that second stage. So there's $1 billion that we'll be seeking from that. So, as of where we're sitting today, we have about $5.5 billion between all the different sources committed to the program. Still working to get that last grant, and still working with FTA on that. Next slide. I think I covered a lot of this, but the funding that I talked about really is intended to try to cover all the capital costs for that modified LPA. You can see here that will allow us to move forward into construction once we complete our environmental work, anticipated later this year. We'll be able to move forward into construction. Construction for this program will be probably over 24 construction contracts. Just the size and scale, as I'd mentioned with the estimate, will require us probably to break these into different construction projects to allow for more competition, more bidders, and more contractors. Next slide. Sorry.
Sure.
There's a question.
Yeah, these are the key slides to me. I wanted to ask a couple more questions. I want to ask about the state legislature.
Yeah.
Washington. There's money slated. Could you describe what that is, the request is, and what the status of it, if it's still alive and likely to pass?
Absolutely. On the Washington side, I'm going to get my years mixed up now. I think 2022, when the Washington legislature passed Move Ahead Washington package, they identified $1 billion from that Move Ahead Washington package for this program. Now, the way it works on a program like this is they set budgets biennially, but they had identified in law $1 billion with Move Ahead Washington for this program. So I think a lot of the budget discussions that are going on right now is which bienniums, may those funds be able to be distributed through. And we also, on the Washington side, just for reference, in 2016, the legislature with Connecting Washington had identified funds for the Mill Plain interchange, which is a part of the investments that we have here. The reason I'll bring up Connecting Washington is originally, I think the funds for Mill Plain were identified to be used here within, I think, maybe the next biennium or the biennium after that. But the legislature, with some of the work there, they actually moved those funds to 2033. So they moved those funds further out, but still have the funds in there since they were identified in Connecting Washington. So obviously we're doing everything we can. We have a bi-state legislative committee group that meets as frequently as they can between sessions. That includes 8 members of our legislature on the Washington side and 8 members of the Oregon legislature, including the chairs of both the House and Senate transportation committees, so that they're always engaged in understanding where things are. And obviously, we're working closely with the legislature on budget requests as an agency, but also as a program if they have any questions right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And if I can ask a follow-up question. So what I'm trying to get a sense of is, if community says no to light rail at this point, I'm trying to figure out what the risk is for these funding sources. And it's kind of laid out in this slide. And I'd just like to read what you wrote, and just if you could describe a little bit more in layman's terms what this means. So the 2.1 million of the 2 awarded grants funding sources, it says it would need to be renegotiated, the terms of it. And then the next one, the $1 billion, it says it would have to be reopened. You would have to reopen the funding sources for that one. And then the SIG grant, which we're trying to get, it says that the program would not be eligible for funding. Is that
Yes,
100% true?
So I don't know if that was on the previous slide or if that's later, but I definitely can speak to it. Was it on the previous slide?
Yeah, if we could go back one slide, that'd be awesome.
Well, just I'll speak to it. So the two grants that we've already been awarded, they were, as I said, there was an opportunity put out, and you have to prepare an application. One of the key pieces of that application is a benefit cost analysis. The benefit cost analysis that we provided was based on that modified locally preferred alternative. So it was the true multimodal solution that we had identified as kind of the regional partners. It included the extension of light rail. It included the investments that we're proposing on the freeway side, but it also included the active transportation, and all of those elements were allowed us to have a much higher benefit cost analysis. So we were able to get, I think depending on each of them had a little bit of a different formula for the benefit cost and how to calculate it, but we had well over like a 1.5 benefit cost, which meant the program saw more than 1.5 benefit for every dollar spent, is really what that analysis was. If the modified LPA were to change, the language in those grant agreements does allow the federal partners who are very much involved in this because of our environmental process work that we're doing to reevaluate and to potentially renegotiate those grants. Meaning if you don't have one of those multimodal elements, the benefit cost would go down according to the criteria that was in them. Same thing for, I think, both legislatures. Both legislatures, the Oregon and the Washington legislature, had provided funding, based on where this modified LPA was being defined, the multimodal approach with light rail, with the highway investments. So I think we'd have to ask the legislatures what might occur if there was a change in that. But I also want to go to kind of come back to what the potential process for a modified LPA change may be. So I had mentioned that there was kind of unanimous consensus amongst those partners when the modified LPA was identified. But as the executive steering group, if one were to say make a change right now, I think it would need to be a question amongst all of those partners about is one not in agreement now or changing their stance now, meaning all of the other ones would. I think it would be a big delay to the program, because it would take time to have those conversations. And, we're really trying to do everything we can to stay on schedule for beginning construction in 2027, because if we miss that, you add a lot of cost and inflation, and then we need to think more about our funding. So a lot of the answer there. I hope I touched upon what you're really getting at and asking.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify for the SIG grant, the capital investment grant that we're asking for $1 billion, we would not be eligible.
Yeah, and yes, thank you. And Paige might be able to add to this. Right now, dedicated BRT can qualify for some CIG grant, but not the same level that like light rail would. So one of the parts of if this was a different mode, like a bus rapid transit, would it be in a dedicated guideway? If it was in a dedicated guideway like the light rail, once it's the same question I think came up earlier, you might be able to run it the 1.9 miles, but then it has to get back in, the I-5 freeway or go through city streets. And so from a qualifying perspective with the CIG, it may not get as high of a rating just because you aren't putting a service into, as Paige had said, 80 miles of existing dedicated guideway. You'd only be creating that shorter guideway, and then it'd have to go back into existing facilities. So, that's an important part of the CIG process. And I know I had a slide that talked through, the ratings and how that works. But Paige, did you want to add?
Yeah. So part of that rating, they want to make sure that what we're doing is going to make sense for the system, and that those dollars are being invested the best way. And so having a 2-mile dedicated BRT with a dedicated lane, people would have to transfer on one end and transfer into the light rail at the other end. And so that's a lot of buses as opposed to trains going back and forth. And it's also that transfer is kind of a disincentive for ridership, having to transfer twice as opposed to getting on wherever you are and tying into that system. And so right now our rating is higher because we take advantage of what we already have and we build on that. Whereas if we were doing BRT, it would be a full new thing. If we wanted to do a dedicated lane and all the way to downtown Portland. That's not possible because we don't have the room for that. And it also would be redundant with the system we already invested in and we already built. And so the great thing about the light rail is it takes what we have and makes it even better.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Go
Karen?
ahead. Yep.
I heard Council Little mention a moment ago that communities say no to light rail. I'd argue that a few people are saying no to light rail. I mean, because the online survey responses, the poll that you did a couple years ago, strongly favor. And I'll just kind of read a couple numbers here really quick. Clark County, 61% of the population polled said they are in favor of light rail. Clark County, excluding Vancouver, 57%. City of Vancouver, 69%. So there seems to be a lot of support for light rail. I'm curious, how many folks are we adding to the region in the next 20 years?
We've added about, was it 80,000 to this region, this region in the last 10 years? Probably more than that.
We're
from the
adding
numbers I was looking.
700,000 more people to the Portland metropolitan area in the next 20 years. That is a lot of people. And people need to cross the river one way or the other. Seems to me like the light rail is the way to go.
Well, and Frank and I we're not here to convince you one way or the other too. We're here to give you the information for you to make your decisions and also to understand why we landed where we are, to give you that background to understand it too. But
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple things, just for purpose of fairness, so, if the light rail were removed, we wouldn't be really worried about the SIG grant because of the cost difference. But that aside, one of the questions that I had was specifically about the complete, getting striped there, the complete 1,000,000% uncertainty of what's going on at the federal level at this moment. And what my question would be is if the situation arose where we lost funding for the light rail portion of it, is there a way to concurrently plan without light rail so that the bridge, because I think this is an absolutely critical project for our region, is, I don't want to end up in a situation where we are not allowed to have funding. We cannot, I can't see any possible way of us funding it without federal grants with the price tag that it currently has. And we don't have any other option. And so it essentially stalls the entire thing. So is there a way that we can concurrently work on two opportunities as an insurance policy that the federal funding doesn't come through?
Well, so it's a good question, Councilor Young. I think, there's a lot of uncertainty right now as far as, what is going on at the kind of the federal level with a lot of the grants. We're doing our best as a program and as agencies, both WashDOT and ODOT, and I know TriMet and CTRAN, to really continue coordination with both FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, as well as Federal Transit Administration, to understand what's going on with all of these grants and the opportunities with them. Right now we are still moving forward with the grants that we've been awarded and we've been executed, and working very closely still with FTA to work on that CIG. So right now, I would say that we are actively working with our federal partners to understand what is happening, to see if we do need to adapt. But as of yet, I don't know that we've gotten the word that we do need to change, because we do have those grant awards, we have the funds obligated, and we're working with our delegations and our federal partners as much as we can to see what's going to come in the future, I guess.
Okay, and then just to add on to Councilor Fuentes' comment, in all honesty, in 20 or 30 years, we will be happy that there is an additional capacity to get people in and out of the region. But a bridge without light rail is much better than no bridge replacement. And so that's where my concern lies on that.
Okay, we'll have an opportunity this afternoon to really weigh in on our policy direction here. So I do have one question, though. You mentioned Connect Washington and funds that were identified some period back to fund the Mill Plain station. Is that included in all your numbers?
Yeah, it's included in the overall allotment that we have. We have a few different funding slides. I just brought the one that summarized the grants. We have a pie chart slide that we can make sure to prepare you that, or to share with you, that really does show how all the funds come together. So the Connecting Washington, it's for the Mill Plain interchange. We're rebuilding that. It is included in our overall funding numbers.
Very complicated. And one thing I've heard as a concern is that even with light rail, that still stop and go once you get into Oregon. Will there be opportunities for like express lanes to get? And I don't know where everybody is going. Are they going out to Hillsborough and Beaverton, or do you have data on where people disperse?
We probably could, and that could be a presentation in itself, but we're finding more that people are less going from city to city and choosing different connection points, and there's not as strong of a peak, AM peak. There's a pretty strong evening peak. But people use light rail for a lot of different reasons and make different connections along the way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a few more slides.
I'm sorry, Councilor Belkite, you have a
Pardon me.
question.
No, thanks.
Oh, sure. I was actually, I do have several questions, but I did not realize that they are not done with their presentation. So I will hold it until the end.
Thank you.
Try to get through the remaining. Sorry, I was muted. We spoke about capital, but I think we were also asked about identifying the operations and maintenance costs. So you can see that there's a lot that needs to be still worked on as far as what the final who would be doing the operation, which agency, which company, what the final design is will determine what needs to be operated and maintained. But right now, very similar to the construction that the capital is paying for, all of the new infrastructure investment and the everything needed. O&M will be needed for stations and security of stations, operations of stations, including at the waterfront where there's going to be like elevators because that station's elevated. It's going to be all of the new bridges. They need to be, annually inspected, maintained. There's going to be the rail itself. There's going to be the catenary that provides the electricity. So when we talk about the O&M for light rail and the numbers that I think have been shared, it's an all-inclusive number that it includes all of the necessary, operations and maintenance parts. So it's not just the person who's making the light rail vehicle go back and forth. It's all of those added elements. And I think as a partnership, as a region, there's going to be, several different agencies who are going to be included in parts of those operating and maintenance. So it's not just C-Tran in Washington and TriMet in Oregon. It's going to likely be combinations of the cities if there's park and rides. There's, even the DOTs, because the bridge over the river is going to be a DOT-owned facility. So the bridge and the inspection of the bridge, may be on the two DOTs to share part of it. So the O&M cost that's been shared is for all of the infrastructure that's needed. And identifying where the funds are coming from is important for that CIG grant, that capital investment grant that we are targeting. They need to know that we have the ability to operate and maintain it after they've provided us those funds. So next slide.
Right, let's pause on this one a little bit more. And so that O&M is for the 1.9 light rail and all inclusive of all of the things that make that happen.
Yes. So the 21.8 million number that you've heard is inclusive of the 1.9 miles of added extension. So any bridges, any stations, any track, any catenary, any electrical utilities, as well as the increased bus service. So we are increasing express bus. That's also included in that full 21 million figure.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide.
Or to me, we've been bouncing around. So we're continuing to work on the ridership. We talked about that a little bit earlier. We touched on it lately. And so we're continuing to refine those numbers and work through the models and the modeling for it. We're using up-to-date data based on what the region is seeing for transit use and using all that to inform this. And we'll continue to fine-tune this throughout the duration of the project to make sure we get those numbers right. And so TriMet and CTRAN are finding both their numbers are increasing and getting stronger in the ridership realm. And again, this project is a long-term, a long-range vision is a big part of what we're trying to accomplish with this program overall for this region. And what we need 2035, 2045, and probably beyond most of our lifespans too. So next slide. So back to the O&M costs, like Frank mentioned, it includes a number of elements, including the maintenance and security. Part of the thing I think important to recognize with the CTRAN language is CTRAN has had an interest in providing the safety and the security and cleaning potentially for the Vancouver stations. And so having that flexibility that CTRAN can, use some of these O&M funds for their own use, I think is an important versatility to keep out there for that there. But also, as far as what is included in all the maintenance, Frank really covered that well, but it's actually the driver and the training is actually the bulk of the cost. That's one of the bigger costs. And so I'm going to put my hands up again and do my little thing, my little TikTok, where you're seeing a train carries more people with one driver. But if you replace that train with a bus, that's going to be a lot more buses and a lot more drivers. And so we often find that drives costs up. And I think the model would be, right now it's a train every 6.5, maybe 10 minutes would become like a bus every minute or every minute and a half. But still working on those numbers. I'm sure I'll be quoted on it, but don't quote me on it. And there's just different factors that will come into play as we do that. And so it is split between Oregon and Washington. It's split at the state line, the deepest point of the river, and 55% of it will be provided by the Oregon portion and 45% of light rail will be in Washington. And that puts Express Bus at 62% being paid by the Oregon contingency and 38% being paid by Washington. And so there's also a certain element of fare recovery. So we have a fare system and it's assuming a recovery ratio of 25%. So that's 5.45 million of that. And so it's split into the Oregon share, making that 9 million of it total and 7.27 in Washington.
I have a quick question on that. So, but the potential sources for the O&M have not been fully identified. And you mentioned the ODOT and WashDOT state funding that could also be a potential here. Are there other sources?
Yeah, I think there's going to need to be several sources. I know on the Oregon side, TriMet's working with the legislature for a certain kind of funding that TriMet usually gets for this. On the Washington side, especially here locally without a light rail service, we're really going to need to work between all the partners, RTC, City of Vancouver, CTRAN, and WashDOT to determine how do we fund the different pieces here. I think that's where the language that had changed in I think November helped the Washington partners because it allowed for additional potential sources to be discussed. But I know there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen around that with the partners. So it's going to need to be all the partners, I think, on the Washington side determining which sources can help fund this.
So would you say that just making that language permissive for CTRAN on the O&M puts us in a better position to have those conversations and negotiate on sources of funding to support this?
Well, I think that'd be a great question for all the partners for Vancouver as well as RTC and CTRAN. But I think having more options available for that discussion would would allow for probably a more successful outcome of identifying the sources. And I think that's the important part, is that this isn't saying CTRAN is covering all of it with that language change. I think it's just having the language there might allow for some options that will help fund it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I have a couple of questions on this. I'm curious because I know CTRAN's recovery ratio. So do any of the lines achieve a 25% fair recovery rate?
Yeah, that was based on historic data that TriMet provided for that.
So some of those lines are achieving that currently?
I think it ebbs and flows per year, and that's the current assumption that it will be in the future. So it's also based on trends of ridership recovering and coming back to higher levels. But that's the current number that's worked into it. But
Okay.
that's another element we will likely be continuing to watch the trends and tweak as we move along.
Okay. And then my second question comes along with this. And I know we're at a point here where we don't know where all this funding is going to come from. There's multiple options. It's going to have to flesh itself out. But I was curious, and it makes things very tricky because it's by state, by agency. And so my question be, there's going to be kind of this original agreement, and how will that play out in the future? Is there going to be, every time that there's cost increase, it's just going to be a letter from TriMet saying these are the new costs? I mean, is there going to be some sort of a committee or commission that's going to look at this to make sure that they protect the interests of CTRAN if they're funding that, or Clark County residents if they're paying that, however it ends up? How will those cost increases, because it's obvious those costs are going to increase over time, but how are those evaluated to make sure that the agencies are paying their correct shares?
I think that's a good question, Councilor Young. An important thing to note that TriMet has no authority over CTRAN, and CTRAN has no authority over the other. Just like all of our partnerships, it will be something that they'll have to come together and negotiate as things change. And it may change in favor, and things may go better and things may be harder, but it'll always be the agencies working together in partnership for that.
Yeah, just a messy situation regardless. I don't think there's any
Many
clean
governments.
solution. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I think it's important to identify that, intergovernmental agreements are a key piece of this partnership. Right now, we have intergovernmental agreements between, really the partnership that was listed up there to ensure that we can move forward through what we're calling kind of this planning and environmental stage. When we get into construction, it's likely there's going to be construction intergovernmental agreements to talk exactly to what you just said from a capital perspective. WashDOT right now is the grantee for the two big grants, the transit grants, but we're going to likely have TriMet or CTRAN delivering chunks of, pieces of those construction. So there'll be an intergovernmental agreement that'll be outlining everything you just said that says, if there's a cost overrun, how does it get accounted for? How do the funds get dispersed? How are we making sure these contracts are moving forward? And then there will need to be an operation and maintenance agreement between the parties, intergovernmental agreement. WashDOT, ODOT currently have one right now for the bridge, but we're going to have to expand that with the transit service and everything. So there will be IGAs that will need to be, vetted by the boards of CTRAN, TriMet, and some of the partners to agree to everything you just said as far as what's long-term, the way that the partnerships are going to work.
Yeah, and Frank is right. It often contains a contingency that outlines,
Right.
in this scenario, what would we do? What scenario would each of these situations be spelled out?
Okay.
So,
Yep.
yeah, thank you.
So just a few more pages, it looks like. So let's power through it.
Yes,
We can-
Then we can
get back
open
to
it up for
Councilor Barcott,
questions.
too.
Thanks.
Next slide, yeah.
So actually, Councilor Young, this slide answers the fair recovery portion of it. And so I was, 2019, TriMet's fair recovery is 28%. In 2024, it was down to 10%. But again, these numbers were projecting into the future and what we think it will grow to be, watching current trends. So there was a dip and a rise. And CTRAN's recovery rate, and I'm not sure trying to think what recovery rate was assumed in, same 25% in that. Here their recovery rate is listed from 2019 being 14% and 2023 down to 5% fare recovery. So if it costs $100 to operate between Portland and Vancouver, $25 of that comes from the fare that is paid. All right, next slide.
So yeah, just two quick more slides. I think one of the things we want to, highlight is that, we've been asked the question, I think we were asked earlier, what if there's a change to the, modified LPA? I think the schedule impacts could be, significant for the program. Right now we're doing everything we can to stay on our schedule, our construction schedule. With the magnitude of this program, if we're not able to start in the water in 27, we're really delayed a full year, and it's a full year for a majority of that program because you really have to start work on the bridge to start doing all the other work that the program's doing, connecting to the bridge. You can't build the approaches today because they're in the footprint of the existing freeway, and so you got to build the bridge, as I said, to maintain traffic. Then the approach, like the southbound approach, get traffic on it to get out of the footprint of the existing freeway. So, a delay right now in a change of a modified LPA would cause the program partners to need to speak about it, could delay our NEPA, which ultimately would impact construction. And so, any kind of a scheduled delay, obviously, as everyone knows, would just add to the inflation cost and the cost of overall construction. And so, we're trying to really address, I think, one of the questions, which is, if the modified LPA changes. Obviously the resolution that's on the board, I think at the CTRAN board, is changing the language back to what it was in the condition. And I think, as I had outlined previously, I think I don't know if that has a direct impact to schedule, like the NEPA schedule is like the LPA would, but it does potentially limit what the partners can use as trying to identify the sources to help fund it. Next slide. And one thing I probably should have said, obviously those two big grants we just executed, they do have some deadlines in them as far as when the expectation of spending them is. And so any delays in our environmental work or start of construction, would start to potentially impact our ability to use those funds, which is a key piece of the finance plan. So, I think this just probably gets to one of the questions we have, why are we still focused on this? I think Councilor Young, you mentioned, and Councilor Fuentes, the region's growing, and I think we need to replace this bridge. And I think we need to do it with a multimodal solution because it's going to provide choice. I think that's the most important part of the multimodal solution is we're still showing 170 plus thousand people a day are going to use their vehicles to cross that bridge in the future. But it also shows that there's another option for those who maybe don't have a vehicle, don't want to drive their vehicle and park it somewhere. So it's providing additional choice for people to cross the river between, the important city centers of kind of our region here. So with that, I think we'll stop the slides and let you ask more questions.
Okay, Councillor Belcott, let's start with you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask some questions that I asked before because I cannot remember the gentleman's name that was online for TriMet before, but there were a couple of questions that he couldn't answer, so I'll go ahead and ask them. It's been reported that TriMet is asking between 190 to 290 million from the IBR to purchase 19 trains. Is that true?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. And then
So if I may, Councilor Belcott, so it is the program proposing that many vehicles and those grants that we mentioned, the capital kind of improvement grants, is where the funds for purchasing those vehicles would come. So they're not in the O&M price; they are in the capital investment. So that they would be eligible under the capital investment grant. They would be eligible under the mega grant that we received. So that's how the vehicles themselves would be purchased. Is there a capital expense, not an O&M one?
Okay, thank you. And then why does TriMet need 19 vehicles for a 1.8 mile extension of light rail?
So going back to the original portion of it, those vehicles have to come and go from Ruby Junction and Gresham for regular maintenance. That's where our lifts, our wheel grinders, all that major equipment is going. And so if you live in Gresham and you have to drive to Vancouver, you're not just driving those 2 miles, you're driving all those miles down and all that time to get here. And that has to go all the way back and through the whole system that entire way.
Okay. I was looking at the system-wide numbers, and it looks like actual light rail O&M costs are about 2 million per mile. So I was wondering, for a 1.8 mile light rail extension, requesting 22 million for over, looks like 11 million per mile. That seems like a huge difference.
So, 2 million, sorry, the 22 million also includes this express bus number as portion of that. And so again, we have that long distance we have to travel that includes that extra time and extra O&M portion of it.
And I would add, there aren't many places in TriMet's system that are very similar to this 1.9 mile stretch that we're extending. I think the Columbia River is a pretty big barrier for infrastructure. I think you can see that in our region. And so this is a little bit more unique than I think other segments within the TriMet system, knowing that, it's basically elevated that full 2 miles. Once you leave Expo, you're going to be on bridge across the North Portland Harbor. You're going to be elevated across Hayden Island because you can't come down. You got to stay up to be able to get over the Columbia River. And therefore, the 3 stations that we're proposing are also different than what's in TriMet's existing system, especially the waterfront station, which I know is a kind of an important discussed element. That's a station that's 80 feet off the ground. So you're talking about it's going to need elevators. It's going to need some additional service there. So it isn't kind of really an apples and oranges. There isn't really a segment in the existing part of TriMet's or even C-Trans service that crosses this kind of an infrastructure need.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go back to the 25% of the passenger related to passenger fares. So TriMet stated that passenger fares will cover 25% of the O&M costs. How many years in the past decade do you know have passenger fares covered 25% of light rail and O&M costs?
Yeah, we could go back to that slide. I think it was 16 perhaps. And so just so you know, the 25% applies to both the bus and the rail recovery. So both agencies are using that number. It's based on, so 2019, it was at 28%. And it's based on what they're projecting the ridership is increasing and what will be at opening and beyond.
So do you all think that the fares will cover 25% in the foreseeable future? Because I know that TriMet's lost quite a bit of money.
So
go ahead,
again,
I'm
these
sorry.
numbers aren't final and will continue. And if that is an assumption that as we see years go by, that we're going to follow those trends and adjust the numbers doing that. So these aren't the final numbers. These aren't the final percentages that both agencies will continue to work on and negotiate. But those were just the current assumptions for the early estimates for that.
Okay.
So there will be an opportunity to adjust that.
Thank you. And I know that the IBR departures, they've talked about IBR departures every 6 to 7 minutes. But is that possible without cutting from another line? Because I know that's not departure time at this time.
Yeah, that's based on the projections for the 2035 opening and years beyond that. And so that's another frequency that we'll continue to refine and adjust, especially as we prepare our CIG application for that. And the FTA will be reviewing our assumptions related to that. And they go over it with a fine tooth comb.
Yeah, and as I stated earlier, Councilor Belcott, that's one of the reasons why, getting back to your question about 19 light rail vehicles, more frequent service will require additional vehicles to be operating on the line.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask my last question. It's been reported that TriMet spent 4.5 million on each of the four new vehicles that were bought for the 10-mile Better Red extension. Why the difference? Has light rail really tripled in price?
Well, so first of all, the Better Red vehicles were purchased as part of the Type 1 replacement vehicles. So TriMet ran their Type 1 vehicles for over 30 years, which is a phenomenal number. They took very good care of them, but it is time to replace them. And so those Better Red vehicles were part of a much bigger contract. So if you're buying 30 cars versus 4 cars, we were able to get a pretty good deal based on the bulk of that project. Better Red opened in 2024. So it'll be about a decade before this new light rail line opens. I don't know if you guys have been following prices, but things increase. And so escalation is a big part of that. And especially in vehicles and other technical areas. And so it's based on projections and typical inflation rates that our entire project applies to all of the costs.
Right. Thank you so much. That concludes my questions.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Belcott. Other questions? Go ahead.
Got a couple more. Kind of going back to the fare recovery, I'm curious, and I'm sure you don't have this information in front of you, but these recovery rates consider the entire system. So I would be curious if there is a variance between light rail and bus service. So I would be interested in getting that to see if there's a difference. I don't know, maybe one's kind of subsidizing the other or not. I have no idea. And then my bigger question on that is, if 25% is not realized, then obviously those maintenance costs are still there. So who at that point in time would be covering that gap?
So I think there's kind of two parts to the question, and we'll have to get back to you on the bus light rail part. I do know, I think one of the things these numbers are representing is we did have a pandemic, and we're hoping to rebound from that. If you look at the years leading into the pandemic, the fare rate recovery was quite a bit higher. And I know Scott, when he was here last time, had mentioned that there's been some changes on the Washington side for C-Tran, like that students have the free fare. And that they see good use of that. So I know that's playing into these numbers. I think going back to that intergovernmental agreement conversation, that's where we really would have to identify if the fare recovery isn't, hitting 25%, do those other revenue sources have the ability to cover it? If the fare recovery gets to 28% or higher, that might also mean some of those other sources could go, less in any given year. And so that's something that'll need to be worked out as we identify, with all the partners, the sources, but then also how that works in an intergovernmental agreement between the different agencies.
And an example of bus versus rail, TriMet has rail, C-Tran has only bus. And so you can see that in the numbers in front of us. I think there's some assumptions that could be drawn from that, because C-Tran's fare recovery numbers here are based on their current entire bus system, including their express bus.
Yeah, I think there still could be some, like the fact that we have the youth going for free and stuff. So there are some significant differences. I would appreciate getting that. I think it would help tell a story. Yeah. And then kind of just the last comment would be is, I think it's very clear that this is a tough issue for the community. And so I would really ask that you be as transparent as possible on this. And, when you come to conclusions, in the best way you can possible. Obviously, none of us are transit experts. And so there's some stuff that we'll never be able to kind of get, but please show your work as best as you possibly can.
Other questions?
Chair, I was curious about the Hayden Island station. So you mentioned that it's going to be very elevated, right? How elevated will it be? I'm curious what that.
So when I say elevated, it'll be elevated kind of higher than today's freeway grade. It may not be on a structure. We might do some fill on there because, you know, structures are more expensive than fill with walls. So we're still working on what the design may be. It'll be elevated from where the existing grade, like if you know where the ODOT permit center used to be and there's the parking lot there, it'll be elevated higher. I think roughly, I don't know, we can get back to the exact numbers. I'd say probably 20 or 30 feet higher than where that grade is today. Because, you know, it doesn't make sense to kind of do the roller coaster, come down and match Hayden Island's grade and then come back up. But that's part of, we'll do a whole station area, you know, work to be able to integrate that station into connections with the folks there on Hayden Island. So when we say elevated, it's not 80 feet in the air. It won't need potentially elevators or anything like that. It's just, it'll be higher and probably have some walkways and ADA accessibility, you know, paths up to it.
But as Frank mentioned, all 3 stations are grade separated. And so in a BRT scenario, it would also need to have, to have those stations, it would also have to have elevators, all those other elements we're talking about.
I know that expense is a big concern for a lot of folks, right? We all care about that, especially as things get really expensive. I can't even afford eggs anymore. You know, that's how bad it's got. And I love eggs, but if we don't build this now, it's just going to continue to get more and more expensive and deprive 5,500 direct jobs in the region for the next 10 years, right? Well-paying jobs, I imagine. And so I can understand and appreciate people's concern, but we're not planning for tomorrow. We're planning for the next, I imagine, 40, 50, 60 years. That bridge is going to be here a lot longer than I will. And so we have to plan for the future. And again, reiterate the 700,000 people that are moving into this region in the next 20 years. That's a lot of people. We're not adding any more lanes. I know you're not here to convince me. I'm simply, you know, thinking out loud. But this is, I mean, for the community that's out there listening, this is an important infrastructural project, and it has to get done, and it has to get done now.
Yeah.
So please go do whatever you have to do and get
Well,
it done sooner than later.
Thank you, Councilor. And to that, you know, I appreciate that. We do very much recognize the cost of inflation, the cost, you know, increase. I spent 8 years working on the previous effort, and when we finished that program, you know, the price tag was 3.2 billion, and you know, here we are 12 years later, and it's, you know, it's potentially double that. The difference right now, though, I think from before, and I want to make sure this message is clear, is during CRC, we had gotten through and we were ready to go to construction, but we didn't have any identified and committed sources. This time we have that 5.5 billion on our way to 6.5 billion of committed sources. We have committed sources. And so now more than ever, I think it's the important time to say, yes, let's agree to disagree on what we need to disagree on as partners. Let's compromise where we need to as a regional partnership. Let's provide the choice and let's move forward and build a program. I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
Councillor Belcott.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask, how many cars does it take to operate the yellow line?
I believe it was in the previous slide, but it's 12.
Well, okay. So I want to go back to the 19 car question. You said it had to, Paige, didn't you say it had, the cars have to go down to, was it Ruby Ridge, you said?
Ruby Junction and Gresham.
Ruby Junction. Okay. So, how are all those 19 cars getting included in the IBR? That seems to be the entire rail as collectively rather than the IBR. So I thought the money that is going to the additional light rail and cars were just for the extension that was coming into Vancouver, not the entire rail system.
So to get, so we talked about the travel distance, that the vehicles going at the end of the line have to travel that full distance, but also you have to run more trains, the entire yellow line, to be able to get the trains to the end and the frequency. So it increases the frequency of the entire yellow line to have the trains make it at the end. I really want to do like a model or like a diagram.
The new light rail vehicles aren't only running on the 1.9 miles. So they would be they would be running the full system to be able to catch, pick up riders and take riders to where they may want to go destination wise. With that added 1.9 mile and the added kind of destination point that is, or origin point that is downtown Vancouver, in order to increase the headways from 10 today to 6 in the future, vehicles running on that whole system need to be increased by 19 to be able to keep that system operating at that kind of frequency. So they're not just operating in the 1.9 mile, they're operating in 8, 9, whatever the distance total miles are.
Okay, thank you. And just to make a comment to Councilor Fuentes's comment about light rail, I will say I've been a community member here, grew up in Clark County, from Clark County, and they voted down light rail in 95, 2012, and 2013. So it is a major concern for constituents in the county. So thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to wrap this presentation up. Really appreciate your time. We're more enlightened in all of the details, and I know there's many more details. The council will have an opportunity to weigh in a policy direction, really largely for the benefit of Councillor Belcott and myself and the positions we may be taking in the March meeting at CTRAN. And while that may seem like a small change to just put the permissive language in there, just may, I think we can see there's much broader ramifications. So it's very important for us to really understand the full breadth of light rail and the whole IBR project. So grateful for that. And during our policy discussion this afternoon, so keep all this information in your minds because we'll have an opportunity to talk about that vote that will be coming up in CTRAN. And I think really whether or not, and we don't need to decide this today, but there have been various resolutions that are being adopted by some of the cities, and there's various resolutions that have been shared with the council that previous councils have adopted. And so I just ask you to think about whether or not there's any desire to move forward with any sort of resolution. And this afternoon, if there's a desire to do that, we could talk about components of that. So that's just what's ahead for this afternoon.
Yeah, and if I may, thank you, Chair Marshall, members of the council, for letting us come and present. As always, if there's more questions, either from the discussion this afternoon or anytime after that, let us know as a program. And if you'd like us to come back and present in the future as well, I'll put that on the table. Just let us know, and we'll come back and keep you updated. So
Great, thank you very much. You've been generous with your time.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
it. Okay, we have another presentation with, I'm expecting a lot of detailed information, but I just asked the council, do you want to take just a 5-minute
Yes.
break now? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break now, convene at 10:25, and look forward to the next presentation. Thank you.